WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisCI to 44321.
Peter Barca of Kenosha is the Democratic candidate for the 1st Congressional District. The election is November 5th. Peter Barca, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Great to be back on WisconsinEye. I used to do this quite regularly when I was the minority leader in the legislature.
Well, that's true. Thank you for coming and participating in our candidate interviews. I'll start by asking, why are you running for this office? How would you describe your campaign's key message?
Well, one of the things that really drove me is we have a do-nothing, dysfunctional House of Representatives that can hardly even keep the same speaker, much less actually get things done. And it's devastating because there are so many key priorities that are facing the American people, and almost nothing has gotten done. And the other thing I would say typifies my approach to politics, which I think is in direct contrast to my opponent and what's going on, is I've always worked across the aisle. I've been able to be successful in passing bills, working with people in both parties, and looking out for where you can find common ground. And that just isn't happening, unfortunately. And that's very unfortunate. I mean, everything from, healthcare to, it's just so important at this time to trying to rebuild and expand the middle class, to protecting people's freedoms, are all just very important issues. And even the Farm Bill, which was supposed to be done last year, it didn't get done, and now it's not going to get done this year as well. And that hurts Wisconsin. It hurts the people of Wisconsin. It hurts our small businesses. And so that's really the reason why I ran.
What do you see as the most pressing issue before the country, and what's a specific action you're planning to take if you're elected?
Yeah, well, there's a number of issues that I think are just so vital. I mean, I served in the FEMA National Advisory Council. And, in that service, during that period, it was during the Obama administration, the administrator came up with a statistic which has only gotten worse, which says that, first of all, 60% of Americans at that time couldn't survive a $500 hit. I mean, that shows how frayed the middle class and families' budgets are. And now it's grown to, I think, 63%. And so it's very vital that we take more aggressive steps to help to bring down costs for people and protect and build the middle class. There's so many things that can be done. Buy American, something near and dear to my heart. In the legislature, I was always a key sponsor of the Buy American provisions. But when I was a member of Congress, I was able to pass a provision in the Defense Authorization Act to make sure ships engines were built in America. That helped to bring nearly 100 people back to Fairbanks Morse and helped for them to hire 100 more. But it also helped to keep those middle-class jobs and keep that technology, which is so important. I also think we have to get rid of these disastrous one-sided trade deals. I mean, that's deindustrialized America. They've been so harmful. When I was a member of Congress, I was on the whip group whipping against the NAFTA bill, and the new bill is really not much better that was passed. And we have to, have better trade deals, and we have to quit, this effort of leading towards the deindustrialization of America. And we have to hold, those corporations that are price gouging accountable. That's absolutely wrong. And, there's so many things that can be done. I was pleased that the Inflation Reduction Act was able to negotiate drug prices. I know my opponent voted 3 times against that. I would try to broaden that. I think it's vitally important that we do negotiate drug costs. That's one of the biggest costs that families face. But there are many other issues as well. I know the Financial Services Committee, my opponent voted to increase credit card fees, and that hurts American families.
How do you see the state of the economy? Is there any legislation or policy that could incentivize economic growth specifically in Wisconsin?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly, as a member of the governor's cabinet, we worked very hard. I was on the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation Board for, really almost continuously since its inception. And we passed a wide array of bills. In fact, I had chaired a partnership for a stronger economy where we passed bills like entrepreneurial support bills. We passed bills to reward those businesses that use Wisconsin small business subcontractors. And there are many other types of efforts that make a difference. I'll tell you, when I was in my first or second month as Secretary of Revenue, we had 10 of the 20 largest companies fly people in from their C-suite saying the number one thing we could do was expand the research and development credit. And I know that's vitally important. In fact, in the Clinton administration, I was in charge of the Midwest for the Small Business Administration, and during that period, there was incentives given for people to do more research and development, and that's vital. That's what gives America its competitive edge. So those kinds of steps and rewarding small businesses, making sure that we give people incentives to invest right here in America. We still have a provision where people can get paid for moving jobs out of America. That is just the craziest thing I've ever heard. I mean, that has to be eliminated. That should be one of the top priorities. But also workforce issues are vitally important. One of the first things, my first bill that I would introduce, which I believe we can make bipartisan, is when people first go on Social Security, they can only work so many hours and they lose dollar for dollar their Social Security benefits. Now, maybe that made sense 20 years ago. I don't think so, quite frankly, but it certainly does not make sense now where we need people who are willing and have an interest in working more hours to do so. We shouldn't penalize people who want to take on more hours. And, small businesses are having a very hard time finding employees because of demographics, because so many of the baby boomers are retiring. There's not enough people to fill their spots. So that's another step. And then finally, one last thing I would bring up is affordable quality childcare. My economists at the Department of Revenue, they all said the number one thing we can do about workforce is make childcare more affordable, and by doing that, people will be able to afford to go back to work and have the security of knowing that their children will receive quality daycare.
What does that federal policy on that look like? Is it a child tax credit? Is it childcare subsidies? Well,
during the COVID period, one of the things that they did, which made a tremendous impact, is they did the advanced child care credit. And I served on the IRS Advisory Committee. I was the head of all the revenue departments in the country through our federal tax administration. And we saw how well that worked. It actually cut childhood poverty in half. So we know that those kinds of tax incentives to help young families to be able to afford child care makes a huge difference. In fact, one of the statistics that hit me the hardest, Lisa, was that when I learned that it now costs more money to put your infant in child care than your teenager in a UW or technical college. Think about that for a second, because when young couples are first starting out, generally they're at their lower income capacity compared to after they've worked for 20 years and have saved money for their kids' college. So steps like that will help not only individual families and help make sure that children get quality daycare, but it will help small businesses by having more broader workforce available for them.
Are there any areas of government spending that should be reduced?
Certainly. As a matter of fact, when I was in Congress, the National Taxpayer Union, which is the only one that rates every single vote that you take, rated me the most fiscally conservative Democrat in the country. And the reason why I took that stance is that, we had a $350 billion deficit, which now would be actually a plus compared to how far they've gone, which is very unfortunate. But my favorite committee in both in the state legislature was co-chairing the Joint Audit Committee. In Congress, I served on the Accountability Committee. And I think it's so important that we're constantly evaluating programs and eliminating programs that don't work.
What's an example of one of those programs that you might cut?
Well, I would say that on the state level, which I'm a little bit more familiar with, we have a whole panoply of employment and training programs that cut across various agencies, and they're very important. One of the first bills I passed as a member of the legislature was to augment dislocated worker funding. But some of them work extremely effectively, other ones not so much. When you look at sort of the return on investment, which is how we should be analyzing things, we learn that oftentimes you don't get the return on investment that you do from some other programs. So it's always important to look at those, analyze them, and try and consolidate and have them amongst those programs that we know have proven to be effective and have a big return on investment, and help people to get the training they need, and have it align with what the needs of businesses are in Wisconsin, so that there's jobs readily available when they complete their training.
The cost of housing is another issue for Wisconsinites. What are some federal policies or legislation you would support that might lower the cost of housing, either for renters or home buyers?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's no question the fixed costs, as I meet with realtors and home builders, and the fixed costs to build a new houses today are very high. And so as a consequence, to build workforce housing is a big challenge. Now, the governor in our administration, we did set aside $500 million for extra bonding, and that certainly would make a difference. But also credits for first-time home buyers. We've had those in Wisconsin before. There's discussion of bringing those back for the federal level. That certainly would make a difference. And then just analyzing those steps that it takes to get approvals and to be able to move forward with construction projects, and trying to find ways to truncate that period. Time is money, and when it takes longer to have approvals, it takes much longer to get developments underway. So those are just a few things that could make a big difference.
Social Security faces potential long-term financing shortfalls.
Mm-hmm.
What reforms to Social Security do you support that would ensure its future solvency?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I think that we cap the amount that people pay into Social Security. I can't remember the amount, but that needs to be revisited, because clearly there's no magic number there, but we do need to have solvency long term. But secondly, I remember Paul Ryan talking about a lockbox. They never did a lockbox. So as a result, Social Security is intertwined with the budgeting of the federal budget. So what's done on taxes will make a huge difference, because if in fact we're not prudent in terms of ensuring that budgets are much closer to being balanced, and from my standpoint, I always look at any tax credits and analyzing what's the economic impact of those. How does it make America more prosperous? I know that the economists, again, that work for me at the Department of Revenue, feels that by giving middle class and those people struggling to get a middle class, tax incentives and tax breaks, that grows the economy much more so than giving money to the top 1% and hoping it's going to trickle down. And that's a differentiator between my opponent and I. He wants to continue to focus on the top 1%. I want to focus on the middle class and making things more affordable for them, which I know will enable them to be able to put a new roof on their house, be able to afford the essentials for their kids, to buy school supplies, and when they do that, then that helps small businesses as well, and it helps propel the economy.
Do you support
it's very
changing
important.
The retirement age for Social Security?
No, I do not think that's a good idea. I know my opponent's in favor of increasing it from 67 to 69. I don't think that's necessary. I think there's other steps that can be done to do that. And, people from their first paycheck have money withdrawn in order that they can have secure retirement and be able to have Medicare. And so those cuts that, for instance, the Republican Study Committee that my opponent served on are proposing will only make life harder for people. And I think that's a mistake. I think that, that how you budget in terms of the total budget that we put together will make a huge impact. And I have, I've always been very fiscally prudent. As I indicated, the National Taxpayers Union rated me very fiscally conservative. And I think it's very important that we, analyze how we balance that budget, because otherwise I'll never forget Newt Gingrich came up with that famous saying, we starve the beast. If we give 1% more tax breaks and there's no money left, then there's no money for whether it's Social Security, Medicare, or Head Start, or many of these other programs that are on the chopping block and Project 2025. This will make a big difference in terms of what the priorities are for the next budget.
I'm going to transition to healthcare. Medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in western Wisconsin. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures in our state?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's vitally important. First of all, it is a huge mistake that we've not been able to accept the Medicaid money. What that means is that Wisconsin taxpayers are paying for Wisconsinites to be on Badger Care and subsidizing the other 38 or 39 states, I believe now, that have accepted that money. That makes absolutely no sense. It's a $1 billion hole in the Wisconsin budget, and that's a huge mistake. But I helped to found the International Society for Cardiovascular Translational Research. And what we did, our whole mission was to shorten the time it took to bring innovation from bench to bedside. And that's the kind of philosophy I would bring to try and instill more public-private partnerships, working with the FDA, the National Science Foundation, to incentivize and to help bring these new innovations forward, which will save costs. The other thing is, I do know that regularly we find that there is fraud in the Medicare program with providers that are double billing and charging people, and we have to be much more aggressive. We have to invest more money to catch that fraud, because that's money that should be going to help provide medical service for people, and that's wrong. And any kind of fraud needs to be rooted out. We need to make it a priority. And but also, I would say that it's very important that that for people who have put away money their entire lives to be on Medicare, that they not be denied the ability to have those benefits that they work so hard to set aside money for their entire lives.
Local communities in Wisconsin are faced with a growing number of issues. For example, issues related to water quality and PFAS, or a sudden influx of refugees like Wisconsin saw in 2021. How do you plan to collaborate with local governments to ensure they have the necessary resources to address those local issues?
Right. Well, first of all, the federal government has a role to play in PFAS. Again, my opponent sadly voted against funding for PFAS, which we have that right here in Wisconsin. It's a huge issue. The Evers administration, we worked hard to try and address these issues, but water quality is essential, especially in a state like Wisconsin that is surrounded by rivers and the Great Lakes, and have as many inland lakes as anywhere in the country. So it's vitally important, and so that would certainly be one of my top priorities, is ensuring that we have those resources. But in terms of collaborating with local units of government, that's something that I've always excelled at, quite frankly, because I believe very strongly we need to work with our local officials. We need to meet with them regularly to find out, what are the key issues, what are their challenges, how can we address them. At the Department of Revenue, we have the State and Local Finance Division, where we met regularly with individual municipalities, as well as like the League of Municipalities, the towns associations, and all of those other groups. And it's so important. That's why I have so many endorsements by elected officials like mayors, village presidents, town chairs of both parties, Democrats, Republicans, and independents.
Are tax cuts or increases a focus of your campaign in any way? And just for example, do you support extending and making permanent the tax cuts from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017?
Well, I think that we have to analyze each and every one in terms of what the impact is on the budget, and you've got to make sure that the expenditures, the inflows meet the outflows. Now, my focus would be on middle-class tax relief. That's where I think we have the biggest impact on the economy. But I certainly would be open to analyzing these. For me, my decision was always meeting with our economists, finding out what they felt would have the biggest impact. But I can tell you right now that there's no doubt in my mind that the bigger emphasis should be on the middle class, helping working people, helping those people that are struggling to get by. I know that'll have a bigger impact on the overall economy, and especially in childcare and also tax breaks for small businesses. Small businesses are the engine that propels the economy. 2/3 of all the new jobs come from small business. Innovation generally comes from small businesses who are putting out new products, new services, and so we want to make sure that our efforts are small business friendly.
Should there be a federal abortion policy passed by Congress, or should the issue be left up to the states?
Well, I know that after Roe was overturned, there was a vote to try and reinstate Roe statutorily. I would support that. I do not believe, first of all, I believe that for women to have less reproductive freedom than their parents and grandparents had, I think is not only unfortunate, it's downright dangerous. We've seen women who, their health is in peril, and they're being told, you have to come back because your life isn't quite in danger yet. And we saw actually, across the country, very serious cases, and in fact, women died. And so it's vitally important that we not allow government, to interfere. But I know there was even a vote a week after they tried to reinstate Roe to say, well, let's at least assure that women and men, for that matter, have the right to birth control. And my opponent and virtually all the Republicans, not all of them, some of them actually voted for that, wouldn't even support that, for goodness sakes. And there's a bill right now. I'll put my name on that bill the first day that I'm back in Congress for IVF, to guarantee the right to IVF. That bill should pass like this, because if it's true, as people say, well, they're for IVF, why are they not co-sponsoring this bill? Why did the Senate block it from even getting a vote? And I know, again, in the Republican Study Committee that my opponent serves on, that would definitely imperil even IVF. So it's so important that we, not have the extremists rule the day. I know that there's no doubt there's a big element in Congress that's going to push for a national abortion ban, and we've seen already how much damage has been done for women that are in desperate circumstances when they're denied health care and they have to wait for attorneys to help them to make a decision at hospitals and clinics whether they can serve people.
What is your position on climate change, and what congressional actions do you support that balance environmental and economic concerns with economic growth and job creation?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a very important point, because that's where balance is so important. First of all, when we see what's happening in Florida right now, to me it's a shame that they are not coming back into session to appropriate more funds as the president has asked for. It's desperately needed. Why would you take a chance with the next wave of storms hitting Florida at this moment? But we're at risk here in the Midwest with floods and tornadoes, and we've seen before, devastating impacts to communities here in Wisconsin. And serving on that National Advisory Committee, it's something that I believe strongly in. So it's just very important that we're very mindful of staying on top of these needs that are very in peril and which paralyze our communities. But there does have to be a balance. We don't want to go to an extreme where it actually hurts our industry's ability to be competitive in the world stage. And that's where these international accords, where we need to play a role, we need to help to ensure that we're moving it in a direction that's responsible and attainable so that we can address the issue of climate change.
Should the United States continue to provide military support to Ukraine, and for how long and in what form?
Mm-hmm. Well, clearly we have a threat with Putin invading a sovereign country like Ukraine. And there's little doubt in my mind that he would not stop there. If he can take over Ukraine, I think Poland is next at risk, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, and other surrounding countries, certainly would be at risk. To me, one of the most important things we can do is to preserve NATO. It's one of the most successful military alliances in the history of the world, and it's important that we maintain cohesion. America cannot be the policeman of the world by ourselves. It has to be done in conjunction with NATO and our allies. And but clearly, it is important that we stop dictators that are trying to invade sovereign territories.
How should the U.S. be balancing support for Israel with concerns over civilian casualties in Gaza in the Israel-Hamas war?
Well, clearly, it's such a tragedy with, I think it was 1,100 people that lost their lives, and just a year ago in a day, and with, these hostages that are still in peril and in harm's way. And Israel certainly has a right and a need to defend itself, but also we have to make sure that it's done in a humanitarian way and that we reduce the risk to civilian life, and we have to bring as much humanitarian aid as quickly as we can, while also balancing to make sure that the terrorists are not getting this aid. So clearly, it's a balancing. I think everybody wants to achieve peace in our day, and I'm hoping that we can reach that point. And it's a very sad state of affairs what happened to Israel and what's happening to so many innocent people at this point.
Are you troubled by the record-breaking amounts of out-of-state money being solicited by Wisconsin campaign operatives to influence our local election outcomes?
Well, I clearly believe that we need election reform more than ever before. Citizens United is a disgrace to this country. It's having a corrupting influence. Corporations are not people. They should not be able to invest directly in campaigns. I think that's a huge mistake. So I think back to Senator Feingold and Senator McCain and their efforts, and that's something I'll pick up on to try and be a force for change there. It's something I worked strongly on when I was a member of the legislature, and we need finance and ethics and campaign reform desperately right now in this country.
A lot of money that is being spent is going to broadcast and stream negative attack ads, many of which walk a fine line in terms of accuracy versus exaggeration. At a time when the nation is so divided, how would you respond to a Wisconsin voter who might ask you to stop using negative ads?
Well, look, I clearly believe that it's better not to have negative ads, but you can't unilaterally disarm when you have, my opponents running ads now saying I'm against law enforcement. I mean, for God's sakes, I come from a family of law enforcement. When I was a member of Congress, I supported 100,000 more police officers. I was one of the top leaders to bring survivor benefits to police officers killed in the line of duty. In fact, our family suffered that. My cousin was engaged to a man who was killed in the line of duty. So, I mean, when you have people that have that incredibly deceptive of information that bears no resemblance to reality, then it's pretty hard to not, respond. But, clearly I think it's better to contrast your record with what you believe, with what your opponent believes. That's completely different than making things up out of whole cloth. The latest ad is that somehow I'm against veterans. I received an award from the VFW for my service in Congress. I was the single legislative leader that brought the POWMIA monument into the Rotunda, where I work with Rolling Thunder, VFW, and all the other veterans groups to get that done. So when people make things up from whole cloth and give a completely misleading, impression, to me that's just plain, deceptiveness and plain lies. Compared to saying, well, here's my stance on health care and what I would do with Medicare compared to my opponent based on, bills or votes that they've taken, totally different story.
The number of Wisconsin school districts going to referendum asking local taxpayers for funding is increasing. Is there a need to increase federal funding for K-12 education?
Well, the federal government plays a role. It's a more targeted role than, most of the funding comes from the state and local level, as it should. And that's where most of the reform is needed. But clearly there are programs like special education, which I started my career directing a camp for kids with disabilities, and I was a special ed teacher for children with severe emotional disturbances. And so that's like one of my top priorities always, part of the reason why I first ran for office, to look out for senior citizens and, people with disabilities and making sure that we have dignity in our society. So that would be one where, just as one example where the federal government has a huge role to play, given the expense that's involved with those kinds of services.
Do you support federal student loan forgiveness?
My belief on federal loan forgiveness is that people should earn that forgiveness. In the legislature, we passed a number of bills where, people in the medical field, if they went and worked in rural areas, could help to pay back their student loans, or, working in targeted programs where we desperately need people. So I believe in people having the opportunity to earn their right to have their loans forgiven.
What would you focus on in an effort to fix what many feel is a broken immigration system?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's one of the reasons I ran. And the reason why I ran is that it was so clear that, we had a bipartisan deal put together by James Langford, one of the most conservative Republicans from Oklahoma, Kristen Sinema, an independent from Arizona, Chris Murphy, a Democrat, from Connecticut. But it's not just they're saying it was good. The Border Patrol endorsed the package. And, there's no perfect bill, but, my opponent said it up front back in the early part of the year that he would work with anybody to get the deal done. Now we see work with almost nobody to get the deal done, because when he was in Kenosha at a town hall meeting, he was asked about it. He said, well, no, I only support the Republican bill. We can tweak that bill. Well, as long as Republicans say they're for the Republican bill and Democrats say they're for the Democratic bill, nothing will ever get done. But here was a bill that would have given the resources which are desperately needed. And you can say what you want about which president does more, but it's the Congress that has to appropriate funds that are very much needed. We have 70,000 people that die a year from fentanyl. We had 5 family friends that lost children to fentanyl. Just tragic. So the idea they would wait a year to let nothing happen, and frankly, with people like my opponent, we're likely to have divided government again in January. Then they'll wait another couple of years if they're sticking to it has to be the Republican bill or the Democratic bill. You have to come together and don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Make whatever progress you can get, but for goodness sakes, let's put an end. Let's get the resources to stop this flow of fentanyl, to process people before they even come across the border. That would be a big step towards solving this problem.
We are down to our final 2 questions. You've talked about this, but I want to ask you, what's the biggest difference between you and your opponent?
I would say there's 3 things. Well, one, first of all, I have a record of working in a bipartisan basis. I've always worked across the aisle. I passed bills like oral chemotherapy. I passed bills for like state use contracts for people with disabilities. I passed bills for telecommunications for the deaf. I passed bills like economic development bill after bill. And so I have a record of accomplishment, and almost all of those came on a bipartisan basis. The Lugar Center, named after Senator Lugar in Indiana, is the only one that looks at everything that a person does. And my opponent is near the bottom, not even the top half in terms of working on a bipartisan basis. Secondly, I would say that I can point to the bills that I passed. I can point to those things that I've accomplished. I don't hear my opponent talk about that. And then finally, when I was in office, I always put as a top priority keeping government close and responsive to people. My offices were open 8 hours a day in every corner of the district. His offices, other than Janesville, which is open 4 hours a week, are open 2 hours a week. We have people that go to his office and are complaining bitterly to public employees. Where are they? I need to meet with them. Well, you got to come back on Wednesday from 10 to 12. That's the only time they're here. That is disgraceful. It's just so outside the pale. When I bring that up with members of Congress that if I've been in touch with, they can't even believe it. I just think that's poorly serving the public, and I would be the opposite. I would be a full-service congressman.
Final question for you. Given the steep national partisan divide, what is one issue you think has the potential to be resolved and that could also bring parties together?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, we have to solve immigration. It's absolutely vital. Secondly, we have to be focused on rebuilding the middle class, and there are many policies where I think we can find common agreement. Things like Buy American, which I think both President Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris support. Things like ending these disastrous trade deals. I know there are some Republicans that believe in that. Things like ensuring that we have access to quality daycare to help young families. Those are things where I think we clearly can find bipartisan agreement on. And we need to work hard. And part of it is that when you wake up in the morning, if you're there saying, I only want to pass my own party's bills, versus if you're waking up every morning saying, okay, what people can I talk to across the aisle? Who can I get to co-sponsor this legislation? How can I find common ground between this Democratic bill and that Republican bill? That's how you make progress, and that's what I've done my entire career.
Well, thank you, Peter Barca of Kenosha, the Democratic candidate for the 1st Congressional District. The election is November 5th. Peter Barca, thank you for talking with WisconsinEye.
Thank you, Lisa. It's always been my delight to be part of WisconsinEye. I appreciate the vital service you provide for the public.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.